Welcome back to Matters of the Heart and Soul podcast. I'm your host, Russell Bruce, and today we have a special Black History Month edition that we're going to title From History to Mystery. Basically, that's from his story to my story. So, as far as Black History Month is concerned in the United States, it was started by Carter G. Woodson in 1926. He was born of slave parents and didn't even start high school to the age of 20, but later attended Harvard where he graduated and once again started Black History Week. And in 1976, President Gerald Ford actually expanded the week to an entire month, and then we had Black History Month. So that is nothing really to brag about because our history is way more expansive than just 1 month. But prior to that, there wasn't much of Black history being taught in the curriculum in the schools. And still to this day, there's still a lot to be added. But what I like to do, I like to expand it beyond just, say, America. I like to expand it to the rest of the world, because when you start studying Black history or say African history, that history is actually 90% of world history. So it's nothing that should be relegated, say, to a month or say even 2 months or a year or whatever. It's actually world history, right? So going back to Carter G. Woodson, there was a great quote of his where he stated that man gets two educations. He says one that's given to him and then one that he gives to himself, and the latter being more important, stating that, we should seek knowledge, especially pertaining to our own history. So let's go back to the beginning. I like to go back to the beginning and come forward. So if we go back to the beginning, I don't think there's any argument that man originated in Africa. Anthropology supports that fact. Science supports that fact. And even if we wanted to use the Bible, it supports that fact. But the difference between the Bible and history is just the timeline. So if we look at biblical history, the Bible tends to start around 4004 BC. And if we look in Genesis, when it talks about the Garden of Eden, it talks about the rivers that flew through, it talks about the Gihon, the Euphrates, and it talks about it encompassing the whole land of Ethiopia. So if we look at a map today of Africa, we'll see Ethiopia is one of the nations on the continent of Africa. But actually, at one point in time, the whole land was referred to as Ethiopia by the Greeks, because Ethiopia actually comes from the word Ethiops, which meant burnt face. So Ethiopia was land of the burnt face people, and that was titled by the Greeks. So if you take a look here, you'll see Ethiopia exists on the southern half, not the southern, but the eastern portion of Africa. Then if you look above that, you'll see Sudan, and then you'll also see Egypt, right? So when we start studying history, the Bible, history, you hear a lot about Egypt, you hear a lot about Ethiopia. And then also in the Bible, you'll hear a lot about, say, Cush and Nubia. So Cush and Nubia in the Bible is modern day Sudan. So if you look at that, that's just southern, it's in the southern half south of Egypt, right? So Egypt consisted of people who had migrated in throughout Africa, but predominantly most of the kings, queens, and pharaohs came from Sudan and Ethiopia. So when reading the Bible, know that this is all taking place here in this particular region. Then also when it talks about the Garden of Eden, and it talks about the river flowing throughout Ethiopia, whether they want to say it's today's Ethiopia or the whole landmass, or they also want to refer to when it refers to the Gihon was flown through Havlia, which is today's Zimbabwe, Rhodesia, right? Which is down here. So the Garden of Eden would have been in this area, or even extended where today they call it the Middle East. But during that time, it was also Northeast Africa, all right? Because it wasn't called the Middle East until the Berlin Conference, which was modern day. So with that said, I really wanted to touch just on a couple things, and what I'll do is follow up with, a series of posts and maybe do several more podcasts or even a live. I would really like for some people to participate, if you have questions or anybody else has some dialogue that they want to add to the conversation, I'll be glad to entertain that, and we could have you on the show, right? But just some things I want to touch on moving forward. Like, here are some kings of Egypt, right? And as you could also see, these king stories are the stories that you find in the Bible. And this is part of the reason why you won't find a burial site for some of these names of the people in the Bible, because they were actually Egyptian kings and queens. So you'll see people who will, parade, say, King Tut or Ramses' body around, but they'll never parade the bodies of some of these biblical characters. And like, for example, one of the kings on here was Tutmosis, right? And I think I referred to this on another podcast. The name Moses just meant son of. So, and you say Tutmosis, it means the son of Tut. And if you say Ra Moses, it is the son of Ra. Or if you say Amen Moses or whatever. So all Moses means is the son of. Great book, I mentioned this one time before also, Moses and Monotheism by Sigmund Freud, where he pretty much spells that out. Also, I want to go back and refer to an old Newsweek article. I think this is from like the 1980s. When they were in search of Adam and Eve, they finally admitted here that Adam and Eve would have been African and would have looked more like this, as opposed to the Europeanized version of Adam and Eve. And once again, I said that anthropology, science, and also the Bible, there's many different ways you could confirm that the original human beings were African. And this isn't nothing to brag about, but there's been a situation where, after the African slave trade here in America and the islands, that the African spirit was pretty much destroyed. So our history was erased. We weren't allowed to read and write in America for 250 years. And this was part of the reason, because you couldn't enslave somebody and let them know of their great past and what their history was. So they had to totally wipe our history out. So we've pretty much been walking around like amnesia victims, not knowing who we are. And so Black History Month was one of those things that Carter G. Woodson, seen as a tool, or Black History Week at the time initially, was a tool to help us to regain some of the great past that we had lost, to help us restore some of our self-pride and our self-esteem. We see so many people today, as far as their self-esteem is concerned, is shot. So, they do such degrading things because it appears as if they don't love themselves. But I think a lot of it is they just don't know who they are. So, genetically speaking, we could also prove that life originated in Africa. Once again, I don't think it's a debate, but if it is a debate, we could clear all this up with these simple steps. Genetics, you can get the recessive from the dominant, but you can't get the dominant from the recessive. And what does that mean genetically? in school, we were taught about spot and the spots on the dog, and you can get the white dog and the Dalmatian with all the spots or whatever. But when it comes to human beings, the African woman possesses the gene to produce all human beings on the planet. So not only can she produce something that looks African with dark brown uh, to light brown features, she could also produce an albino with blonde hair and blue eyes. So that would pretty much cover the whole spectrum. So if we wanted to talk about natural selection, man migrating out of Africa. So if we look, all human beings, once again, started in Africa, and they talk about the migration out of Africa occurring, we'll say 100,000 years ago, to make it early, but it was really probably much earlier than that when they began to migrate out, because we could find fossil remains here in America that, probably go a good 150,000 years back. And a lot of it was found in Central South America. There was some also found on the West Coast, like near California. So these are Olmec heads. The Olmecs were also referred to as Algonquin. They were the predecessors of the Mayans. So the Mayans, they never took credit for building the pyramids or the early cultures or the early cultures in the Americas. They give all the credit to the Olmecs, who are these African descent people that are shown in these 10-ton heads. Some of these stones are 10 to 15 tons, and they're gigantic. So to this day, they really don't even know how they were made, let alone the fact that they have Negroid features on them. So these were found throughout America. So there's some great books written by Runoko Rashidi, who passed within this last year. He wrote a great book on African presence in early Asia. He wrote another one on African presence in early Europe. Like if you go and you do the studies on Europe, right? And I have some links I'll probably post along with this. Even in Europe, the Grimaldis, which were this very short Africoid type beings, they inhabited Europe 20,000 years before the modern day European existed there. So they were the first inhabitants, or say they were there prior to the Europeans who are there currently. So a lot of times we look and see who's like in these different nations right now, but if you go back 1,000 years, 5,000, 10,000 years, it wasn't like that. Like you go to Africa now, northern parts of Africa is full of Arabs, and then you have mixed races, you have Persians, you have Arabs, you have Europeans, but a lot of them came there after the conquest had taken place. So like the Greeks came in, conquered Egypt, say around 300 BC. Then after that, then the Romans came in, then you had Arab invasion. So it was invasion after invasion after invasion. But when these invasions had taken place, all the pyramids and everything were already built prior to. So these people had nothing to do with the building of the pyramids, with the math, science, the astronomy, all the things that Egypt had given to the rest of the world. All that stuff was already intact. So, and the Greeks themselves had no problem with giving credit to the Egyptians, right? So Herodotus, who's a famous Greek historian, he clearly stated, that most of their knowledge and wisdom, they owe credit to Egypt. Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, they pilgrimaged into Egypt and learned from the Egyptians. Matter of fact, one of them was killed. I'm not sure if it was Herodotus, for coming back to Greece and was accused of teaching black magic, because it was something that was foreign to them, as far as, the spiritual systems and understanding nature. things like that. So he was accused of practicing black magic and was killed. I think he was poisoned, to be exact. It was either Herodotus or Socrates. So going back to Egypt, so let's just look at this map one more time. So at the Berlin Conference, when, today's Middle East, which, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Iran, those areas that they call the Middle East, they also tried to include Egypt as the Middle East. And if you look at that, Egypt sits in Africa. That's almost like saying New York is not part of the United States, that it belongs somewhere else. All right. So, and once again, Kush in Nubia would have been south of Egypt in Sudan. So when you're reading scripture and you hear Kush or Nubia, Kedar, those different nations, all of those nations were these particular African nations that surrounded Egypt. And this is what modern Sudanese people look like, and this is pretty much what they looked like back then. So there wasn't too much migration of these people out. Very historical people. Probably the tallest people in the world come from Sudan. If any of you remember Manute Bol, who used to play in the NBA, I think he stood about 7'8", and I think his son Bol Bol is currently in the NBA, who also is a 7-footer. Not sure exactly how tall. He was still growing the last time I checked. But that's what the Sudanese people today look like. So looking at some of the Egyptian pharaohs, and a lot of times when you see like movies on Egypt, you'll see the Charlton Heston types playing Moses, but you won't get to see a lot of these pharaohs and queens and kings, and one of the things we could tell that they belong to the African race or the black race, which we'll talk about that too, because race is something that was created by Bloombot, when Europeans decided to, I think it supported white supremacy to create race and then create the dominance. But of course that came long after the Moorish Empire fell and everything else. They waited till they got into a position of power and then start creating all these fictitious scientific studies in social studies. But if you look, clearly these people were African and had African features, so if you couldn't tell with the lips, the nose, the hair, the body types, you could always, pretty much tell. These hairstyles we wear even to this day. That queen right there is my queen. And as you can see, it hasn't changed. We're easily identifiable by our culture. So today when you hear, at jobs where, they don't want them wearing dreads and so forth to work, it's pretty much saying that they don't like our culture. This is very much part of our culture and who we are, and you start reading the stories of Samson and about his hair. I'm pretty sure if you were to find any statue or anything of Samson, he had long dreadlocks and hair. All right, let's see. What else can we touch on? So coming forward, 711 to 1492, the Moorish Empire. And I'm just giving you a little bit about some different histories here, but what we'll do, we'll follow up and go into these in greater detail, in depth. I actually did something last year on the Moorish Empire, probably 25 years or so ago. I wrote some articles for Black History Month in my hometown newspaper. Shout out to the Newcastle News. for supporting me and allowing me to post. I actually did one on the Olmecs. I did one on the Moorish Empire. I did one on, Africans in America before Columbus. And I did several others. But I just really tonight just wanted to touch base and lay the foundation for the importance of Black history. And really that is to help build back up the self-confidence in the psyche in Black or Africans who have been spread throughout the diaspora, that we do have a history. We have a very rich history. You'll hear a lot of people saying that we haven't contributed much to the world when we've contributed a hell of a lot to the world. Greece and Rome, their foundation is laid in Egypt, and it's debatable, but I can lay out the evidence, and I'm not even a scholar. I'm just a person who dug deep and studied, but I've seen the debates, by the scholars, and there's plenty of European scholars that support this same philosophy. But one, we do know that life did begin in Africa, which is not debatable. The only thing is whether or not you believe in the creation story or the Big Bang. Matter of fact, I'll add a third one, that we probably were dropped off here from another planet or galaxy, and that's a possibility as well. But either way, those early people were very melanated people, and they would have been considered African, and all of us here on this planet are descendants from these people. So let's see if there's anything that I missed. I did mention the Moorish Empire from 711 to 1492. The Moors left out of northern Africa, particularly in Morocco, under the leadership of a king named Tariq, and they conquered southern Italy, like France, and different parts of southern Europe. That's why to this day, most people in southern Europe, after 800 years of mixing with these Moors, have dark features, So we go back in history in Europe, especially in the Scandinavian areas, they trace the blonde hair, blue eyes back to a single human being, say about 6,000 years ago. And even parts of Italy and Spain had blonde hair, blue-eyed people, but after the Moors had spent 800 years there, and the race mixing that occurred, it changed the complexion of the beings there. So you'll see many, say, Sicilians or people from southern France with very dark features. They have dark hair, dark eyes. Even if I go back to my hometown, there's a lot of mixing of the races there. You almost can't tell who's who and what's what, and so it tends to, you can't be racist, because matter of fact, most of my family, I have a lot of nieces, cousins that either half Black, half white, half Black, half Indian. So we are very much mixed, and we're just one big happy family, one big race. So this whole thing of race really can get kind of sickening, but just for the fact of breaking down some of the myths and, getting some of the power back to those who were destroyed by basically lies, because history is pretty much told by the victor. So those who are in power pretty much tell the story, and of course they're always going to tell the story that paints them in the best light. So you really can't fault Europeans for doing what they did. 1500s come along, the European Renaissance comes, the Pope pretty much gave Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci, the keys to just paint anything they wanted, like paint Jesus, paint a picture of the angels. And of course, everybody came out white. So where does that leave the rest of the people? So, we say that we're Christian and it's all about love, but yet, we take something as powerful as God and the Son of God and the angels, and we don't make it inclusive, you know. And I understand that, back in Europe, where, say, if it's predominantly, well, right now it's not even predominantly white, and even America is not. But when we live in a multicultural society, you run into these issues where the dominant society is going to tell its story. If they're not being fair. If they're being fair, they will. And one thing about America is rapidly browning. So, it may change in our lifetime, it may not. But in the meantime, if I were of African descent, I would be seeking this information on my own, because I wouldn't rely upon the government or the school system to teach me or my children. So that's pretty much it. So I'll follow back up later with some more information, some more podcasts, some more posts, and try to give out some more information. I could go real deep with this, but I'm gonna kind of keep it light as I can. But I want us all to stretch a little bit deeper and to let's break down some of these myths, because I think a lot of the looking down upon African descent people is that people just don't know enough about us, and a lot of us really don't know enough about ourselves, so that we can break down these myths, have better conversations, and have conversations of equity, and not those where someone's pretty much telling you who you are and defining you. Don't allow anybody to define you. Define yourself, and you can define yourself with truth. All right. So once again, this is Russell Bruce, Matters of the Heart and Soul podcast, and this has been a Black History Month special edition that we're calling From History to Mystery, His Story to My Story. And we'll see everybody soon. In the meantime, peace